Right, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Hope that's not too loud. Welcome to you all to Rolph Valley Sport and Health, which is also the Rolph Valley Sports Medicine Centre, and also the centre where we run our Weight Light program from. My name's Austin Jeans. I'm the sports medicine physician at this place. In fact, I'm the only one in Zimbabwe, so that's a nice monopoly to have. I have been talking about low carbohydrate nutrition, often referred to in the regional context as Banting, because Banting has become the watchword mostly in South Africa. It doesn't actually mean much anywhere else. The true science of this nutritional model is low carbohydrate, high fat nutrition. So you'll hear me use that phrase rather than Banting. And we've been talking about this subject for the last 3 years. And often those talks have been quite long in trying to get all the subject material across, usually followed by very long question times, and we've usually gone home at midnight, having had a tiring Friday night. The new thrust and the new strategy is to try and break these presentations down into shorter, biteable, digestible chunks of information. One of the things that's assisted me a lot in actually doing this is a book that have been writing called The Low Carb Companion, which should come out in October, which has enabled me now to break this down in effect into chapters. And we're going to try and use that as the basis for presentations going forward, so that they're shorter and they're easier for people to take away practical steps. So in the first instance, I'll half apologize if you've come this evening to hear the be-all and end-all of low-carb nutrition. We're not going to be doing those sort of 2-hour presentations anymore, but I can assure you that tonight's talk about the 12 steps will be very comprehensive for any of you who are looking at this as an action plan from a health point of view. At Rolph Valley, we run this program called the Weight Light program, which has been running for the last 3 years with some significant successes in individuals. And one of those individuals is here this evening, and he's going to say a few words. He's a very well-known gentleman, and I think it's always very nice to provide a practical example and a personal testimony. We're not trying to be a reality TV show at all, but to try and make the point that it does work. And it's one thing for me, as the physician in charge of this program, to stand up and say that it works. But it's another for someone to say, I started here and this is where I am. Having used this as a strategy, I think that makes a bigger impact. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Mr. Bill Annandale, headmaster of St. John's College, to just come and say 1 or 2 words. I have no idea what he's going to say, but I hope it's good. Thank you very much, Mr. Bill Annandale. So 30 kilograms is no slouching effort, I would say. And in our program of the last 3 years and many, many patients, Bill stands out as one of those who has done incredibly well. So I'm not going to stand up and say to you that every patient who's come through our program has achieved that sort of outcome. But many have. And he really is an inspiration to me, as someone who believes fully in this program from a health point of view, and he's living testimony to the fact that it can work if you are the right kind of person with the right kind of discipline and the right kind of knowledge. So there are a couple of people walked in after we'd started, and I would just reiterate the point that this evening we're going to limit the conversation to what I term the 12 steps, which are a basis that we use in our program to checklist what patients are doing, and very importantly, to try and find out why someone on a low carbohydrate, high fat nutrition program may not be achieving success and targets early or at some point in time in the program. And Bill alluded to the fact that occasionally he felt the program had stalled for him in terms of measured weight loss. And when we do detect that, we use this 12-step checklist to try and find out why. So I'm going to use this as the basis for tonight's presentation, and hopefully you take away some practical points from there. At the conclusion of this evening, Banting Delights, the Naisted family who have adopted the product range of this, both in baking, cooking, and product supply. They've brought their stuff here. So I would ask that you go and see what they have to offer, and they might have some treats for you to try. But before you run away tonight, please go off into the corner where Jenny and Kim are, and go and see what they've got on offer. Our Weight Light program is run by Linda Anstey here at the Sports Medicine Centre. You met her on the way in. She's got your emails. That's her number. You can always ask her questions anytime. So, Bill alluded to why people might use a low-carbohydrate nutrition program, and I put a scary list up because it's scarily good. It's an increasing list of conditions for which we are now using low-carbohydrate, high-fat nutrition strategies to benefit people with these problems. I didn't say the word cure. I said to benefit, in many cases as part of a medical strategy. Certainly in cases like type 2 diabetes, those of you who came to my talk on that recently, I will tell you unequivocally now that low carbohydrate nutrition is the cure for type 2 diabetes. Medical drugs will never be the cure. Nutrition is the cure, and we are achieving that outcome. By far, if you're not just using it from a health point of view or from an athlete's point of view, which is another domain, the common areas where this is very useful are in weight loss, metabolic syndrome, which is also called prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, coronary heart disease as a management strategy in cancer, key in Alzheimer's, probably as effective, if not more effective, than drugs in childhood epilepsy, and is very much part of the medical intervention program for polycystic ovary syndrome, which is a common cause of infertility in women. Those are the big conditions. And then out of this list, there is a growing list of other conditions for which this type of nutrition, and I fully agree with Bill, I don't use the word diet too commonly because it means different things to different people. It's nutrition. It's a lifestyle intervention. Not something you do for 12 weeks and then go back to the way you were if you wish to have sustainable outcomes. So, 12 steps to success, but more correctly, a checklist of potential pitfalls that you can use yourself, and we certainly use in our program to try and keep people on track or find out why they might not be on track. And the first step is that we have to ensure that if we are going to achieve an outcome in people who we are already taking for granted are intolerant to carbohydrates, whose metabolism says that they don't handle carbohydrates well at all, and that for them carbohydrates are uniquely fattening. We call that carbohydrate resistance, which is a talk on its own. If you're carbohydrate resistant and you expose yourself to high intakes of carbohydrates, you fatten. You get diabetes. You get high blood pressure. It feeds your cancers. Then the first step is to make sure that the carbohydrate intake is not too high for your tolerance. And the carbohydrates in our diet predominantly come from the starches that we eat, the sugar that we eat, and also, as Bill said, from processed foods. In America, the one study that stands out is an evaluation of 600,000 processed foods in supermarkets, of which over 80% have added sugar. Sugar directly added to those foods. Everything from cereals to sauces to gravies to soups to all manner of things, many of which you wouldn't think would have sugar in them, but they do. The most important intervention, if you want to lose weight, as someone who is prone to weight gain, especially around the middle, which is the most unhealthy place to gain and store fat, is around your waist. The most important intervention is to cut down our carbohydrate intake, our starch, sugar, and processed food intake. And very importantly, if you are very weight challenged, and certainly if you're diabetic or pre-diabetic, is to cut out all sugar and refined carbohydrates. That is the number one intervention. Because the bottom line is if you are challenged by carbohydrates, you are committing harikari. The more that you have coming in. bear in mind that when we talk about low carbohydrate, you've got to understand there are different forms of low carbohydrate diet or nutrition. Most people on a normal diet, Western type diet, are eating in excess of 200 grams of carbohydrate a day. If you're on a conventional diet, that's what you're eating. So you can just simply cut your carbs to 130 to 200 grams, and the dietitians will tell you this is a reduced carbohydrate diet. And for people who have small amounts of weight to lose or are just trying to improve their health profiles, this works very well. In medical interventions, we are much more cognizant of cutting carbohydrates to much lower levels. And we're not measuring this and we're not weighing it. I just want to give you some idea of what it means. If you're on a low carbohydrate nutrition program, it's less than 130 grams a day. If we were to actually count it, for people who have type 2 diabetes or who are very weight challenged, who are obese, we have to restrict carbohydrates to less than 30 grams a day. In our program, we work on 25 grams of carbohydrate a day. And that's very little carbohydrate. So that gives you some idea of what we're actually talking about. Key point about carbohydrates is just about everything that you find in supermarkets has sugar in it somewhere. And as Bill said, you've got to become aware of that. Reading labels is one of those ways of becoming aware. So, number one on the checklist is to make sure that your carbohydrate intake has been reduced. If you are obese, have prediabetes or diabetes, it's got to go down to less than 25 grams a day. And the honest truth is, if you want to know how to do that, you need to be in a proper program. It is very hard to do that on your own without advice, structure, reading material. For people to cut their carbohydrates down to less than 130 grams or between 130 and 200 grams, it's easy. You just cut the starches out of your diet. So you don't eat potatoes, you don't eat rice, you don't eat pasta, you don't eat wheat, you don't eat bread, and you're already going to achieve that. All right? I talk about the white starches, and you take out soft drinks. In fact, if you take soft drinks out of your diet, you probably cut 30% of your carbohydrates out of your diet for many people. 30% of their calories for many people come in the form of good old Coca-Cola and its family. All right, you know the question is coming next. How many teaspoons of sugar in a 330 ml can of Coca-Cola? And all of you who know the answer, keep quiet. Some of you haven't been here before, have a guess. Mr. Trinchi said. 8. No, how many teaspoons in a can of soft drink? How do you think? About 8. Any advances on 8? Okay, those of you who know can answer the question. Keep going. 12. Okay, if you're talking about Fanta grape, you're spot on. All right, if you're talking about Coca-Cola, you're talking about 10. Okay, 9.5, 10, but it's a considerable amount of sugar. And I always make the point, if I made you a cup of tea and I advance the suggestion that I put 10 teaspoons of sugar in your tea, you would think I'm stark raving mad. But in the next breath, you say, no, it's a bit hot, give me a Coca-Cola. And you would bat an eyelid. Okay. So that's the kind of direction in which it is so easy to get considerable amounts of highly refined sugar with as many deleterious effects into your body. So number one, carbohydrate. Number two, as important, is that we checklist that your fat intake is adequate, i.e. that your fat intake is not too low. If you remove carbohydrates substantially from your nutrition, then you have to alter your source of energy in the first position. Secondly, you need to alter the effects of nutrients on appetite. Carbohydrates stimulate appetite, fats reduce appetite. So it is very important on a low carbohydrate program to substantially increase our fat intake from healthy fats. And this sort of modern suggestion of the world that we should eat low-fat products is nonsense. By and large, most low-fat products have got added sugar to add back the flavor, consistency, and appetite effects that have been removed when you've taken the fat out. Okay? If you take fat out of food, it usually tastes like cardboard. And it's got a low energy content. So the food industry puts sugar back into all these products, which is not what we are after. So things that are low-fat, fat-free, that's of no value to us on a healthy, low-carb, high-fat program. We want a high-fat intake from all healthy sources of fat, be they animal, dairy, olive oils, nuts, coconuts. These are natural, healthy oils. And there is no restriction on fat intake. And fat will never make you fat. The only studies that have ever associated weight gain with fat intake have been in individuals who are also eating a high carbohydrate diet. If you eat a high carbohydrate, high fat diet, you are very likely to gain weight. But the nutrient that's doing the damage is the carbohydrate. If you take carbohydrate away and keep that fat intake the same, you lose weight. So fat is not the nutrient that creates fattening. It might seem a bit weird, but that is the fact. And tonight I'm not going to talk about the metabolic profiles and what goes on in the body, but Bill made the point that sugar in the body in people who have susceptible metabolisms is converted to fat. And in some people, very efficiently. So that people convert sugar to fat and get fat. Fat does not get converted to fat. We burn it for energy, and therefore we should shovel it in. But there is a natural satiation point with fat. And I've said before, I once gave a talk where I put a can, in fact, a glass of Coca-Cola and a glass of olive oil. I said, let's have a down-down competition. Right? Nobody particularly wanted to volunteer for the olive oil. All right, so, but imagine that. Let's down a glass of Coca-Cola and an equal volume of olive oil. I mean, it's a no-brainer. Who's going to win? It's very easy to eat or drink large amounts of refined carbohydrate. It's virtually impossible to do the same with fat. There's a natural effect on our appetite, and it satiates and it fills us up. And it's long-lasting. It's got double the calorie content of carbohydrates. Fats give you 9 calories roughly per gram. Carbohydrates give you 4. Carbohydrates are terrible fuels. Very inefficient. Fats are highly efficient. They are super fuels for the human body. Right, step number 3. One of the problems in Mona's country, which is America, and those of you who have traveled there will know that food portions in the USA are unbelievable compared to what most of us are used to. So people who have got used to eating massive amounts of food have to move away from that habitual intake of large amounts of food, because you're not going to lose weight if you're eating massive amounts of food. And I like this one. It says, I have more food in my body than in my fridge, which is very common for people who struggle to lose weight on high food intake. Point number 4, step number 4, frequent snacking. Conventional nutritional advice has led us into a world where we believe for some reason, but there are good reasons, that we should be eating 5 times a day. For some reason, we're going to starve ourselves and pass into oblivion if we don't feed ourselves 5 times a day. Breakfast, lunch, and supper are totally inadequate. We must snack at 10 and at 3, and often at midnight. Chocolate munchies, girls, chocolate munchies, 12. Now, there are reasons for that. One is the food industry would like you to eat 5 or 6 times a day. That's particularly good for food industry profits. 2, if you're eating a high sugar, high refined carbohydrate program diet, your energy levels blow out every 2 hours, because sugar can only provide you with effective energy for about 1.5 to 2 hours. Then it blows. So you have a sugar low, you have an energy low, so you're hungry. Your brain says, go find some food. So the conventional high carbohydrate nutrition program that we've been told to eat healthily for 40 years makes us hungry. But there's a problem with frequent snacking. First of all, we don't need it on a healthy program of low carb, high fat, and you'll find that your appetite doesn't warrant snacking nor encourage you to do so. But metabolically, when we snack, if we look at insulin levels in the human body through the day, this is breakfast, lunch, and supper, and this is the 10 o'clock snack and the 3 o'clock snack, couple of sandwiches, bar of chocolate, donut, whatever we feel like. We end up having frequent, persistent, elevated levels of insulin. And those of you who've come to my talks about metabolism will understand that if you have persistent insulin levels, you will develop a condition in the body called insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is the background basis metabolic disorder that creates obesity, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, is heavily involved in cancer growth and spread, blah, blah, and blah. So snacking is one of the profiles of human eating that predisposes us to insulin resistance and all the negative effects thereon. It's about insulin. We were never designed to have insulin spiking every 2 or 3 hours. We were designed to have low levels of insulin produced infrequently when we accessed low carbohydrate, high fat nutrition, when we slaughtered the beast and we ate it. We'd have an insulin response. And then 12 hours later, when we might be hungry again, or we go and eat the beast that we've put in the freezer or in the cave, then we might have another insulin response. But not this frequent, high, persistent, fattening responsive insulin. So frequent snacking is a blunder. We look in that checklist, in that step for snacking, must go. And one of the things that we do for very weight-challenged individuals is we try and encourage them in the early phase of a program to actually only eat twice a day. And it's actually easy to do. Once your body has adapted and you're no longer hungry and your appetite is suppressed, it's easy to eat twice a day because you're not hungry. But it's a very difficult thing to do if you've got a lot of sugar intake because you're always hungry. Step number 5 is that for certain individuals, excessive dairy can be a problem. It can be fattening. And it can be a reason why people are not losing weight initially or while their program is stalling. Because in fresh dairy, there is a weak sugar. Do you know what it's called? Some people are actually intolerant to it and have tummy troubles. It's called lactose. Okay? So lactose is what we call in chemistry a disaccharide. It's got 2 sugars in it, one of which is glucose. Glucose and galactose. And glucose is the common component of table sugar, and it's the common sugar that we add to foods, which is sucrose, which is glucose and fructose. So these are the sugars that can cause havoc in the body. So for some people, especially those who are very carb resistant, who are very insulin resistant, lactose can produce enough glucose in their body to maintain the state of fattening, to maintain the state of conversion of glucose to fat. So we check dairy intake, and in people who are struggling, we cut it. We cut them down to half a glass of dairy a day and usually solve that problem. Step number 6 is to check protein intakes. Some people have a misguided or read it wrong or heard it wrong and think that this is a high protein diet. It's not. It's a high fat diet. Protein comes along for the ride. So we do not advocate a high protein diet, and you shouldn't be eating steaks bigger than yourself, as Barney Rubble is attempting to do. Because there's a couple of things about protein that you need to understand. First of all, protein stimulates insulin, which you may not know. Carbohydrate, sugar, is the most powerful nutrient that stimulates insulin in the body. But protein stimulates approximately half the amount of insulin that carbohydrates and sugar do. So it promotes insulin. And insulin is something you don't want in high, frequent, persistent levels in your body. So high protein intake will also mean a significant amount of insulin, which is a fattening hormone. The other point about protein is that we can only assimilate a certain amount of protein in our body and convert it into muscle tissue and other things that we make protein into. So there, if you're on a high protein intake, you actually have to do something with the excess protein. And you may not know that what we do is we digest protein to amino acids, and we convert those amino acids in our livers to glucose. What is glucose? It's sugar. So funny enough, in the wizardry and alchemy of the human body, we take protein and we make it into sugar. Well, sugar is exactly what we don't need. Because sugar then will go into our liver, be turned into fat. Sugar will stimulate a greater insulin response, and we're back to square one. And guess what? We're not losing weight. We might even be gaining weight because our protein intake is too high. So we check on protein intake. It mustn't be too high. A low carbohydrate, high fat program actually means a moderate protein intake if you're doing it properly. And if you've got good advice, it will automatically be moderate. It's not a high protein diet. And the simple way, we don't go around measuring things. We don't like measuring things. People give up after measuring things. It's called palm size. A palm size portion of protein, be it fish or meat, in area and thickness is approximately what your body wants. And your palm's different to my palm. Big people have bigger palms and little people have littler palms, but that's your palm. So that's a very good index of how much protein per meal, palm size. Perfect, you're on the money. Step 7 is for many individuals, fruit intake, if it's too high, will promote fattening, maintain a state of fattening, and certainly very bad for diabetic states because fruit contains glucose and fructose, both of which are sugars. Fruit is carbohydrate. Some fruits are very sugary and other fruits are not so sugary. So when we're giving people advice about fruit, there are some fruits that are more recommended than others. So apples and pears and berries, those are pretty good because they're not so sugary. However, grapes and pineapples and bananas are disastrous if you're trying to lose weight or solve your diabetic problem. That's point number one. So there are poor choice and better choice fruits. Secondly, we don't need fruit every day. Whoever told you that wasn't telling you the truth. Because if you come to my talk about what to eat, why to eat, and where do we get our micronutrients and vitamins from, you'll learn that we don't need fruits and vegetables to get our vitamins and minerals. We get 95% of them from animal products. So we've been led down the garden path in the suggestion that we need lots and lots and lots of fruit in multiple colors and highly varied and every day. We don't. So if you're having a weight problem and you're trying to lose weight, fruits are the good choice fruits and sparingly eaten, maybe twice a week in small quantities, and you will live long. So fruits are an issue. Step 8, alcohol intake. Everybody wants to ignore this and nobody ever wants to ask the question, but it's important. All right, so alcohol, certainly this particular alcohol, beer, is highly sugared in many cases, depending on the brewing process. So some alcohols are a better choice. So spirits and wines are actually not so sugary, and beer is very sugary, as are sweetened liqueurs, etc. Okay, so there are choices in the alcohol category, but ultimately excessive alcohol intake is definitively has a negative impact on people's ability to lose weight, improve their diabetes, etc. So we always check on alcohol intake and moderate it where necessary. Step 9. As individuals, we are all different. And one of the things we know from our own personal experience in the program and all the research that has been done is that when we put someone from a low carbohydrate, high fat intake program, everyone will adapt to it at a different rate. And the adaptation that principally has to take place is that your body has to adapt to utilizing fat as its predominant energy source for your muscles, for your heart, for your brain. And it's a process of biological change. For most people, it's about 10 to 21 days. On average, about 12 to 14 takes people that long to adapt. And in that adaptation time, they feel tired, but energy-less. We tell people, don't do this if you're about to do your first amazing marathon of your life, or your most important marathon of your life. You've got a huge exam coming up. That's not the time to start changing your nutrition, because it will take you 2 or 3 weeks to change. Once you change, and Bill made that point, you feel amazing. It's almost like magic. 24 hours after 2 weeks of feeling listless and tired, you suddenly feel like you could run up and down Everest a couple of times. So there's an adaptation process and a time frame. Interestingly, athletes or active individuals take longer to adapt. High-performance athletes can take up to 3 months to adapt to a high-fat diet. When they do, they perform very well. And in fact, up to 6 months to perform at high intensity at the level they were performing before they changed. So athletes are an interesting category of individuals. But most people who are not so active, we actually stop our very overweight patients from exercising at all. Like we said to Bill, you don't need to exercise. The weight loss will occur through nutrition change. Exercise is extremely important for health. I'm not deriding exercise. We live in an exercise environment. We promote it. We live by it. But it's not the way that you lose weight. Okay? And if you exercise in the adaptation phase, the evidence says the adaptation phase takes longer. So we'd rather you switch over to fat quick. So we don't want a lot of exercise in the early nutritional change. Step 10 is a key one, and for girls can be an issue. If you are carbohydrate resistant, which means you're carbohydrate intolerant, which means you are peculiarly susceptible to fattening on carbohydrate and sugar intake, you will generally carry that weight around your middle. You might go elsewhere, you might become globally overweight, but the middle is almost the central point, in a way, okay? That tells us that you've got a metabolic issue. But for many girls, they carry their weight below the waist, the so-called pear-shaped body, as opposed to the apple. pear-shaped weight gain is not generally a feature of carbohydrate resistance or intolerance. It's a genetic profile of weight gain. In fact, it's a very healthy place. The girls always want to shoot me. It's actually a very healthy place to carry fat. It actually is associated with high fertility, good birth rates, and longevity. So it irritates the living daylights out of some ladies who come to our weight loss program and say, I need to lose all this weight. And we look at them and all that weight's below the waist. And we don't have the same degree of positivity that we do when people come in all the weights around here. So pear-shaped weight is not always a sign of carb resistance and may not have the same response to that dietary change. But this is not unhealthy. Might be not what girls want, but it's not so unhealthy. We're about health. And this is Rihanna. So often, if you look at that triangle there, Rihanna is a nice, good example of a pear-shaped beauty, as it were. Okay? Step 11, checkpoint number 11. We get to this having worked down the list where people are still stuck, struggling, plateauing. At some point in time, very commonly in ladies, we might check their thyroid function. Now, a lot of girls come and it's like step number 1. Doc, I can't lose weight, you check my thyroid. No, actually, dear, let's go through the first 10 steps first. Let's check carbs and fats and proteins and fruits before we get here. But in an individual where we've gone through that and we can't find that, if you're one of those individuals, this is something that can, in some individuals, because thyroids control a lot of your metabolic hormonal processes, control the rate at which calories are burned. So yes, underactive thyroids may well be a role player in weight gain or inability to lose weight. It's on the checklist, but it's not number 1. Okay. All the ladies would like it to be number 1 because it's easy to fix. Take this pill. Okay? And that's what we all want. We want that quick fix, take this pill. And the last step, which we get to, and we often screen this out anyway in our medical questionnaire because you're not always sure where they are going to have an effect, is that some medications have a significant impact on our weight gain and our ability to lose weight. Medications can encourage fattening. And the common ones, which are commonly taken, are beta blockers, which are commonly prescribed for high blood pressure and heart disease, as are diuretics, which are water loss tablets, corticosteroids like prednisolone often prescribed for asthma, for arthritis, other conditions. These unfortunately have a great tendency to encourage weight gain. Antidepressants, especially the Prozac type of antidepressants, okay, what we call the serotonin reuptake inhibitor drugs, they have a significant effect on weight. Insulin, I've already said, internally in the body, insulin is the fattening hormone in our bodies. If anything in your nutrition, especially your carbs and sugar that pumps your insulin, is going to make you fat. By the same token, if you're giving yourself insulin because you're a type 1 diabetic, and we talked about type 1 diabetes in my last talk, if you're a type 2 diabetic who's not managed by diet alone, who's not managed by oral anti-diabetic drugs, is now giving themselves insulin. Insulin encourages them to become fat. And as they become fatter, they become more insulin resistant, and their diabetes gets worse. Bad cycle. So insulin administered as a medication is fattening and interferes with ability to lose weight. And then HRT, hormone replacement therapy, female hormone therapy that's often prescribed for menopause to try and alleviate the symptoms of menopause, unfortunately also has a negative effect on weight loss and positively encourages weight gain. So for certain individuals who are struggling, we have to look at this. Not to say we can always change the profile, but we have to look at it. There might be alternative drugs that we can talk to their doctors about to try and get through this particular problem. So, I promised tonight would be short and sweet. This is the 12-step checklist that we've been through. The relevance and importance is that you as an individual can take away the 12 important lessons of low-carb, high-fat nutrition. Because if you've got a weight problem, you've got to make sure that these have all been ticked. Some of them will require medical assistance. For us in a program, it provides a very efficient and comprehensive system of getting through the potential pitfalls that someone might be stuck in that are causing them not to lose weight or to have a plateau in their program. And when we find it, it's exciting because we move forward. It might be in some individuals that the drop in carbohydrates, step number 1, might have been initially effective, but then at that level of carbohydrate intake, weight loss will then plateau. So we might not get any further than step 1. If that person's carbs have come down to 100 grams a day and they plateau, we cut them to 50 grams a day and we see change. Okay, so we often find that, in fact, most of the time, Linda and I are operating step 1, step 2. Step 1, carb. Step 2, fat. Because girls don't want to eat fat. And in the early part of the Weight Light program, what did we find when we went through the evaluations of every girl, lady who came in unable to lose weight, and they were doing brilliantly on the carbohydrates? We just asked the next question. So let's talk about your fat intake. Yeah. Fat intake. Yeah. You eating fat? No. And we understand why, because it's so ingratiated into our thinking that fat is going to make us fat. Okay, so what I want to tell you is out of this 12-step checklist, 90% of the problems are found in 1 and 2. Too much carbs, too little fat. We need to be eating much less carbs, much more fat. And the other 10 steps probably only account for the problems in 10% of people who are struggling to achieve a positive result. But very important that these things are assessed and checked and guide you in your approach to a low-carbohydrate, high-fat nutrition program. So, I thank you for your ears. I will ensure, and Linda will tell you, we do a monthly talk, and every one of them now is going to be a 30, 40-minute presentation, bite-sized chunks. We'll return back probably soon to the metabolic basis and talk about carb resistance and insulin resistance. If you haven't heard that story, you must come and hear it. When Bill came to a talk, I think, Bill, you probably came to one of the 90-minute talks. We did the A to Z, but I wasn't sure Bill was even awake at the end of that one. But he certainly picked up the first half an hour and he got going, because the first half an hour was about carbohydrates and fat, so you can see that was effective. And he lost his 30 kilos. Okay. So thanks very much. I'm very happy to take an open question time. If you are pressed for time and you need to go, please do make sure you pass by Banting Delights. If there are no questions, we're all going to pass by Banting Delights, and you can certainly talk to me there while we're there. But please join us for future presentations. I promise you this is the future of the world from a nutrition and health point of view. Bill talked about knowledge. There's lots of books that have the knowledge. Mine will be out in October. We'll let you know when it's out. It'll be the most up-to-date review on the science and practicalities of low-carb nutrition that's been written to date. And I hope to get it out before the next big tome that's coming out by one of my colleagues called Jason Fung in Canada, who's producing his in February. So I'm getting in before him. But there's going to be this outpouring and continual provision of growing knowledge in this area. This is the growing field of medical science, of nutrition science, of weight loss science, and of treatments for what we call the diseases of lifestyle. Principally obesity, diabetes, cancer, hypertension, Alzheimer's. This is the future. And it's very exciting. Thank you. Please ask any questions you like.